Yeah. Welcome everybody. We are live at Siftach for Coffee and Kabbalah Parshat Chayei Sarah. Thank you everyone for joining. If you're watching this, I'm honored. We're going to dedicate today's shiur to our very, very, very close friend of mine and all of ours, Brina Astor, Brina Bat Shlomo Zelig. We miss her so much. Brina passed away only a few days ago. And even as I was listening to my last year's recording of this shiur, I was hearing Brina asking questions and sharing. I could still hear her voice. And we miss her so much. And we're dedicating all our learning to her neshama, and that she should come back very soon, and we miss her. Okay. And also, of course, the learning should be the zchut, all of the chayalim, they should come home safely, and the chatufim, and shalom for all Jews everywhere. Parshat Chayei Sarah, the fifth parsha of the Torah. The first question, well, let's summarize the parsha. We begin now where Avraham and Sarah, last year was this is where Sarah passes away at 127 years old. So we're fast forwarding. Last parsha was when Sarah gave birth to Yitzchak at 90 years old and 100 years old. Now we're fast forwarding 37 years later. It's like really increments of 37, a lot of years like that. 37 years later, Sarah passes away at 127 years old. Actually, she passes away, the Mefarshim tell us, from hearing the news about Yitzchak's Maked, about the sacrifice of Yitzchak. She heard that was going to happen. She, of course, neshama couldn't handle it, and she passed away. So this week's parsha begins with the main story there's three main stories in this week's parsha. One, the passing of Sarah, Avraham's mourning for her for many months, and the burial of Sarah, which was a whole story of acquiring a plot of land where Avraham saw Ma'aras Machpelah before. He wanted Sarah to be buried there. He knew Adam and Chava were buried there, and he wanted to acquire it. And there's the story of Avraham paying money to Efrat Hachiti and the transaction of acquiring this land, which is the first land acquired on paper transactionally of Eretz Yisrael by a Jew. Then we have the main part of the parsha. I think it's 57 psukim, if I'm not mistaken, about Avraham telling Eliezer he needs to find a wife for Yitzchak. So it's the whole shidduch story of Yitzchak marrying Rivka and their beautiful love story of Yitzchak and Rivka falling in love, which we're going to speak about later in the shiur. And the third part of the parsha is Abraham's passing. How many years afterwards? When Abraham is he lives 38 more years after this, so it's like another parsha span of 38 years, and he passes away at the age of 175 years old. He also remarries, according to the commentaries, his Hagar, and has more children, and then Yishmael does teshuvah, and he concedes the birthright as the heir to Yitzchak, and they bury their father, and that's the end of the parsha. So that's just the summary of the parsha. But the first question we're going to start with, and we're going to focus on today, firstly, the name of the parsha. Seems very unusual. Many of the commentaries ask. Sarah, it's called the life of Sarah when it's all about the passing of Sarah and what happened after her death. Last week's parsha was the life of Sarah. This is the death of Sarah. So it seems the very antithesis of what the name of the parsha should be. The name of the parsha reflects on the essence of the parsha. So how does the essence of this whole parsha teach us about Sarah's life? Another question that we're going to speak about later is about the love story of Yitzchak and Rivka and what we can learn about everlasting love and true love that is eternal from this beautiful teaching of the Torah, spending 57 psukim on the life of Yitzchak. It's a rom-com. It's my favorite rom-com in the Torah, this like portrayal of this shidduch of Yitzchak and Rivka. Beginning. So going back to the question, why is the parsha called the life of Sarah when it speaks about everything after her death? And so this is obviously so fitting when we just lost someone so close to us who was such a big part of our lives. We learn something very, very profound. And we learn that the Zohar tells us that a tzaddik's life is found, Yatzer mi b'chayehu, after his passing. You find a tzaddik's life more after his passing than during his lifetime. How do we explain that? And what we come to learn from this is that Judaism has a very unique, novel approach to what life and death is. Judaism refers to people who are alive as dead. Someone who is poor, who is desolate, someone who's a rasha, someone who's blind, are considered even their lifetime not fully alive. And someone who is dead, who passes away, like Yaakov Avinu, it says Yaakov didn't pass away. So life and death in Judaism mean much more than just the body having a heartbeat, much more than that. And what we end up learning is that there are things in life that end at death. There are things that are not emes, and things that are not true in emes. Those things have a lifespan, those end. Those are all death. Even when they're alive, they're death because they have an end. Things that are emes, the only things that are truly life are things that are emes, things that surpass the body, surpass this world, and are eternal, and don't die after, and don't end after a certain amount of time. And what we learn from this is that if we are to live a life, if one lives a life chasing materialistic pleasures, how their body looks, their clothing that they wear, the house that they have, and all their materialistic pursuits, how many followers they have, and etc., and then their life ends at death. because all of that we can't take any of that with us to the grave. But if we choose to live a life of things that are eternal, if we live a life of purpose and a life of spirituality and a life of connection and values, there are things that continue after death, and those are the connections that we make with people that we love, the impact that we have in the world, the impact that we have in those around us, and what we give to the world that completely surpasses death. And in a letter to I'm going to bring to you a letter of the Lubavitcher Rebbe to a grieving parent who lost a child, Rachmana litzlan. And there's a very long letter. I can share with you the whole one. It's in the year 5738, 1978. It's a family in Italy a Chabad family in Italy who was mourning the loss of their child, who was mourning a lot. And one of the things the Rebbe spoke about is how the reason that we mourn is because the connection between the body and the soul is severed at death. We actually have this referred to. The references is in this week's Parsha, in the very first pasuk, I believe, where it says, "V'tamas Sarah b'kiryat arba hi Chevron." The Zohar says that Sarah is the body and Avraham is the soul. We're going to speak about this soon. But if we read, the Zohar says that every time it says Sarah and Avram, they were a unit, just like the body and the soul are units. Sarah and Avram are a unit, where Avram was the neshama and Sarah was the body. And when it says that the body, V'tamas Sarah, it says the body passed away. Kiryat Arba, hi Chevron. He says Kiryat Arba is the four elements. That at passing, what happens is that the bond between the neshama and the soul is weakened, is severed. That's the Chevron. He says hi Chevron. The Chever, the chibur between the body and the soul, leaves at death. Which is what is the chibur of the body and soul? The four elements. Kiryat Arba, the four elements of fire, earth, air, and water. That ceases to exist at death. But everything else, the neshama continues to. And what's the word, Rebbe? He says that a bullet, a wound, a sickness, an accident, that doesn't take away any of our love or connection to the person. That doesn't even touch the person who they are at their core. It doesn't even affect them at all. All it does is separate their connection of the body to the neshama. So the Rebbe says the only thing that a sickness or fatal accident can do is cause a weakening or termination of the bond that holds the body and soul together, whereupon the neshama departs from his temporary abode in this world and returns to the olam ha'emes, to the pure space, to her source in the eternal world. I'm skipping a little bit. Then he says, nevertheless, the departure and ascent of the neshama to her heavenly abode is mourned for a time by the relatives and friends, because the person is no longer physically here on earth and can no longer be seen and heard and felt by the physical senses, and therefore is sadly missed. However, the neshama herself retains all of her faculties, all of it. And, as explained in our holy sources, reacts to the conduct and feelings of her relatives and friends left behind, sharing in their joys, in their sorrows, and benefiting from their good deeds, especially those on behalf of the neshama. And the neshama continues to daven for and intercede on behalf of her relatives and friends here on earth. In other words, this is still the words of the Rebbe, the departure of the neshama from the body is a great advantage and ascent for the neshama herself, and the loss is only for the bereaved, and to that extent is also painful for the neshama as well, because she's sad on our behalf. So our connection, the Rebbe is saying here, is that our connection to those who pass away, the neshama's connection to us, she retains all of her joy in our joy and pain in our sorrow. And that's what the Rebbe said, it's not good to mourn after the period of mourning ended. When we mourn, it causes the neshama pain on our behalf. So there is a specific mourning period, because it's important to acknowledge and process our connection to the body. But beyond that is not good for the neshama. And what we can do instead is v'hachai a lot. But the main thing is that, thirdly, he says it's certain that the neshama in Olam ha'emes waits and expects all of the weights. The neshama is waiting and expecting all of the good deeds that she has been doing on earth and would have continued if Hashem had given her more years in this world. These are still the words of the Rebbe, would be, and that she expects that it would be continued on her behalf by all of her near and dear ones. The neshama is expecting of us to continue those in Maisim on her behalf. And so taking this back, when Judaism speaks about life and death, life doesn't end at when the body leaves when the soul leaves and the body disconnect, because what life is and what emes is continues way beyond and perpetuates way beyond the lifespan of the body and the soul. In fact, there could be a person who's living hasn't had any true life, because all of their life is things that are completely empty of any truth and meaning to it. It's all physical, materialistic pleasures. So the message from this is so profound, in that we want to, v'chayiten alibo means that when from death, those who live take to our heart. What we take to our heart from passing is it makes us realize, and I would actually ask this when I was a little pisher, when I was 21 years old and dating, every guy I dated, I would ask them on the first date, what do you want to be remembered for when you die? I was very morbid, but really, why did I ask that question? Because it really, when I hear from a person what they want to be remembered for after they die, it tells me what you live for, and it tells me who you are at your core. And even then, I remember I really wanted to know who you are, and who you are is not who you are in the fake sense, with the materialistic things you want. It's who you are. What are you? That is the true you that's going to continue existing and living after you pass away. That is who you are. Who you are is what you are that defies. It doesn't matter whether or not you're in a body. That's the true you. And by thinking about that, and that's how we can take to our heart and learn from the passing to think about our lives and think about what I want to be remembered for after 120 years. Who is it that I am at my core? And to strengthen and focus and remember what it is that has no true meaning and value, what it is that will all cease to end. And so much times, because we're in a world that is olam el helam and so much concealment, we are so distracted and blinded by wanting more and more physical things and desiring a nicer house and more physical things and more followers and so many external things that are not real. They're fully complete. They're mavet. They're considered emptiness. They're just total death. They're nothing, no emes to them. And those are, and when we recognize for a minute what true life is, we focus on building a life that is eternal and building a life that perpetuates itself and connect. And that is the connection that we have with people that surpasses the body, that surpasses forever. The spending time with the people that I love, expressing my love to them, and creating an impact on those people that I like, sharing a kind word, filling someone else's cup. That lasts after the person passes away. Filling those around me, the smiles and the warmth that I spread, to people around me, the inspiration that I can share with another person, a kind word, an uplifting word, visiting someone who's ill, visiting somebody who's sick. All of those things are forever. And the mitzvahs that we do are forever. Every mitzvah that we do lasts in this world and in the next world. So if we focus on mitzvahs, on things that are eternal, we're building true value and we're accumulating a life that isn't eternal. So if we go back now, for us, our lives are gashmius and ruchnius, most of us. So that's why our life is, some of it ends and some of it continues after we pass and hopefully we left a big impact on the world, and we lived a spiritual life where we made an impact on the world that will continue forever. But going back to why a tzaddik's life is forever, even more after their death, is because a tzaddik's whole life is spiritual. And because it's tzaddik's whole life, they're not caring about the physical, they only care about the spiritual. Therefore, their life is found even more after their death, because their whole life was their spiritual impact in the world. And after they pass away, they're no longer limited by their body. They can now accomplish more spiritually than even in their lifetime. And that's that simple answer of why it means that a tzaddik's life is even more after their death. And it comes to my mind when people say that the Lubavitcher Rebbe didn't pass away. What they really mean is, of course, there's a body. We go to the kever. The Lubavitcher Rebbe's body is no longer here. But what does it mean? Who he was, what the Rebbe stood for, what his essence was connecting, spreading Torah and love and Ahavas Yisrael to every Jew in every corner of the world. That, of course, continued not after his death, even more than in his lifetime. And I always share this, but every year when I get to go to the Chabad convention, which is next week for the men, they have the highlight of the end of the whole convention is when they do roll call and they announce the shluchim in every country in the world. And after that, they say, well, all of the shlichim and the shluchot, I got to actually announce this when I was my first year in shlichot. They asked me to do part of roll call. Well, all the shlichot who went out before Gimel Tammuz, when the Rebbe passed away, please rise. And there's maybe a few hundred or a few dozen. And then, well, all the shlichot who went out after the Rebbe's passing, please rise. And then there's thousands of women who stand up. Every year I cry, I get chills. It's just such a powerful moment to see a person's life, their essence, perpetuate even more through their passing or after their passing than in their lifetime. And that's what it means when people say, that's essentially what they're meaning, that the Rebbe's still alive, because his essence of who he is still alive. And if we take all this to Sarah's life, we now understand what the Torah means when it says Chayei Sara, why it calls this Parsha Chayei Sarah. If we discover and explore who Sarah was, what her essence was, what her purpose in life is, and what her mission in life is, we'll actually find that her mission in life was actualized after her passing, and even through her passing more than in her lifetime. And we learn and we explore Sarah's life, we see that Sarah's main focuses on life and her goal in life was, number one, being a mother. She was the mother of the Jewish nation. And stop being the mother of the Jewish nation can only happen if there is a Jewish nation. And that happened after her passing, when Yitzchak marries Rivka in this week's Parsha, the main story in this week's Parsha, when Yitzchak takes a wife who matches his spiritual caliber, is going to be the mother of the Jewish nation, and she comes into Sarah's tent. And first of all, so that's number one. Actualizing Sarah's life mission being actualized physically, tangibly, mothering the Jewish nation happens in this week's parsha. That's number one. And the second main goal of Sarah's life was establishing a Jewish land, a Jewish nation, and a land for for the Jewish people. And again, in this week's parsha, even though Hashem promised a land to the Jewish people and potential, it only became, the first time it became actualized physically was through Sarah's passing. Sarah acquired a piece of Eretz Yisrael and bought a piece of land and actually tangibly brought it down and made it physical. So Sarah's mission of life of acquiring a Jewish land was also accomplished not only after death, but actually through and because of her death. Because of her death, she was able to actualize that. So we see already why Chayei Sara. And then also Yishmael, even Yishmael bearing at the end of the Parsha, bearing Avraham, was because of her nevuah and her higher level of nevuah, of knowing that by placing boundaries on Yishmael, it will cause him to see his wrong and come back and do teshuvah. So by sending Yishmael away. So everything that Sarah stood for in her lifetime was actualized and perpetuated itself and continues till today to perpetuate itself till now. So hopefully we can learn from this to really think about what is emes in our life and to create a life that is eternal, and to create and to think about what are the things in our life that are eternal, what I can leave for this world after 100, and what it is that I want to leave, and what is my true purpose and mission that will exist and surpass my lifetime in this body, Bezrat Hashem. On a side note, what it gets really interesting is that the Zohar says, I'm going back to what I said earlier, that Avram is the body and Sarah is the neshama. The Zohar uses this to explain a few things. Number one is, this helps us understand why Avraham was so happily ready to sacrifice, even though it was painful for him. He didn't want to sacrifice his son. He was ready to do it for Hashem. And Sarah, just hearing about the news, not even being there, died from it. How could they have such different reactions? Avram was there, and he was able to come to terms with it. And we learned that because Avraham's whole outlook on life was on the spiritual, he was the neshama. So for him, even if Yitzchak were to be sacrificed, his mission would continue spiritually, because Avraham was about the spiritual life. But Sarah, whose whole partnership with Avraham was to take the spiritual ideals and manifest it, and to realize that the whole purpose of it is to manifest it in this physical world, to bring things from the spiritual idea or potential and to manifest it physically. For her, if Yitzchak weren't to exist in a physical sense, then there would be that wouldn't be the purpose. So for Sarah, whose whole mission was the body, taking the body's purpose is to take the neshama and manifest it in Hashem, really wants in the physical mitzvahs, in this physical world, to make a home for Hashem in the physical world that we live in. For her, she couldn't even live with the idea that Yitzchak wouldn't continue in a physical way and have the nation of Am Yisrael, not just in a spiritual way, but in a physical way. And this partnership of Avram and Sarah also reflects itself, if you reread the Torah, with the perspective, with the deeper idea of every time it says Avram, it's body, and every time it says Sarah, it's neshama, or every time it says Avram, it's neshama, and every time it says Sarah, it's body, you'll have so much profound insights on our life. It's really messages. The Zohar says also hidden in these stories are messages for us about our body and neshama. And one of the things the Rebbe speaks about is how last week we spoke about when Sarah wanted to send away Ishmael and Avram didn't want to. What did Hashem tell Avram? Kol asher tomar lecha Sarah shma b'kola. And if we read it in the way of the Zohar, we'll read everything that it's telling the neshama that everything that your body, Sarah, your body tells you, shma b'kola, listen to her voice. And what's fascinating about this is that even though in this world you think the neshama is way higher than the body, especially after everything we spoke about, the neshama is eternal, the body is physical, it ends after a certain amount of time, you would think that we should listen to the neshama, not the body. The neshama comes from is much higher. But we actually learn the opposite, that the body, even though in this world it seems lower, its source is from a much higher place. The body stems from a way higher source than the neshama comes from. And the body holds infinite wisdom. And actually, there's a teaching in the Baal Shem Tov that says that 3 people in this world merited to see Olam Haba, a taste of the world to come in their lifetime. One of them was Avraham, one of them was Yitzchak and Yaakov. I just blanked out on the other 2, but about Avraham it says that how did Avraham merit to see Olam Haba in his life? When it said, Kol asher tomar lecha Sarah shma b'kola. Because in this world, in the future, we'll see how the woman is a higher level than the male. Even though now in this world we live in a male-dominated world, we don't get to see that. Only now, as we enter the era of Mashiach, we're slowly coming to the era of seeing the source of the woman who's higher. But in the way that is above, the woman comes from Eshes Chayla, Teres Baila comes from a higher source. The feminine comes from a higher source than the masculine. But we're in an upside-down world, in Olam Hafuch. So everything is backwards. So in this world, it's seen backwards. But as we enter closer to Mashiach, the Rebbe says we're seeing more and more that the female, the power of the feminine, and the feminine rising, and that's really, he says, the spiritual reason why the feminine liberation movement happened. It was coming from a spiritual pull. Really deep down, the neshama knows that that's the higher calling. So really, that's the deeper idea of it. And so on one level, Avraham was meriting to see Mashiach times, because his wife, he was able to see revealed now that his Sarah had a higher level of nevuah than him, and he was told to listen to her, and he was able to taste Olam Haba. And when we reference it to the body, the same thing. In Mashiach comes, we're going to see that the body comes from a higher place than the neshama, because we think the neshama came down to fix the body. If that were the case, then when Mashiach comes, why would the neshama, who's perfect now, and shalem in the body, come back down in this world in the body? if the neshama is higher, and it has to be that the neshama can actually gain even more for herself through being in the body. The body has a lot to give its soul and to give the neshama, and that's why a Mashiach comes up, but neshama is going to come back down into the body, and we learn that then the neshama is actually going to get her sustenance from the body. That the neshama will be sustained from the body. And so because that's how it's going to be, Mashiach comes, Avraham merited to see in his lifetime, Kol Asher Tomar Lecha, he merited to see in his life that everything that the body tells you, listen to her voice. Listen to what the body's telling you. And for me, I love bringing this to a metaphor practically in our life. We become very, in our generations, more and more disconnected from our bodies. So much that like it affects even halacha. In the olden days, women were so in touch with their body and their cycle, they could actually feel when their womb opened. Before they were getting their cycle, their menstrual cycle, they actually knew when their womb opened up. And they had very clear cycles. They were so in touch with their cycles and their month. Now our cycles are all messed up, and halachically, that's what affects a lot of the changes in halacha from how it used to be, is because we are so out of touch with our bodies. We're so disconnected from our bodies. We don't know what our bodies want. Sometimes we're thirsty and we eat because we think we're hungry, but really we were thirsty. Sometimes we're sad and we eat. But our bodies, we're so out of touch with that. And Kol Asher Tomar, for me, I take this message as Kol Asher Tomar Lecha Sara Shema B'Kola, as a message to us to pay attention to the neshama, to know that our body has so much wisdom, because the source of our body is very, very high, and our body has so much wisdom for us. And we have to, and in therapy now, so many modern day therapists are finally learning this old teaching, the Torah, about being body conscious and even eating intuitively. By your body knows, for example, your body knows what food, if you really pay attention and come intuitive, you'll know what nutrition your body's craving and missing. If you're looking for a protein or a carb, or if you're just thirsty, or if you need to take a break from eating, if you'll pay attention to your body, you'll know maybe I'm not hungry, maybe I'm sad and I need a hug, maybe I need to fill my neshama with Torah, and I'm trying to fill that void. There's so much wisdom our body has. Also about our wants. We're so disconnected from our wants and our desires. We don't know what we want, and we suffer so much from that. Like, I don't know what I want. I don't know who I am, what I'm looking for in life. Our body has so much wisdom for us. If we would pay attention, our body informs us about our wants. Our body also has wisdom to inform us about people, if we're feeling attracted or not attracted, or if somebody's energy around us is causing us. Our body will help us know what we're feeling. If we're being triggered, if every time I'm around a certain family member, I'm triggered, my body will tell me, it doesn't mean I should cut off that person. It means figure out what that trigger is and what it is that you haven't repaired, and repair that. So if let's say I'm around a family member or a person, and every time I'm around them, if I pay attention to my body's tightening up and stiffening, and I'm clenching, and I'm breathing more shallow, and my breathing is not relaxed, that's my body giving me wisdom that there is something I haven't worked through here that you should really work through. And it's beautiful wisdom, and being around that person is triggering something that's amazing, because now it's you informing you something that you have to work through and talk through and breathe through and figure out what am I feeling deep in my soul, what it is that I need to heal. Maybe I need to have a conversation with that person. Maybe I need to go back to my childhood and send love to that place, that space that didn't feel that. Whatever it is, there's so much healing we can do. It informs us about where our healing needs to happen. And if we would pay more attention to our body, we would be so much more healed. Our neshama would gain a lot from paying attention to our body. So Kol Asher Tomar Lecha Sara Shema B'Kola, I take it as the inner voice. Listen to the inner voice of your body informing you about your neshama, informing you about things that are going on deep down that you can use to elevate yourself and to come higher. So that's my beautiful takeaway that I really learned from in this pasuk. Just some examples that I've learned through like years of just therapy and working on myself, and I still have many, many more years that I need to do. But something like when you make a hachlata tova, if you make a decision to be more healthy or to take on a daven every day, sometimes your body can inform you. There's like a science and art to making the right hachlata, because sometimes you make a decision and it never happens because you took a decision, hachlata, for health or whatever, that's too much, that you're resistant to. If you're too resistant to it, you won't be able to follow through. So let's say I want to daven every day. If I say I'm going to daven every day and it never happens, I need to take on, the Rebbe always said, to take your hachlata, cut it in half, and then cut it in half again. Find a hachlata that you will do. Extend. You want to have a little bit of resistance, but not too much that you won't do it. So let's say you want to go walking every day. I always say, or go daven every day. So I'll say, okay, I say that to myself. How is my body, once I make the decision, I'm going to daven every day. Is my body tightening up? That means I'm not going to do it. My body's resisting. It's never going to happen. Or am I, and I cut it in half. Well, I'll daven 5 minutes a day. Or I'll daven once on Shabbat, or I'll say moda'ani every day, I'll say bracha, until I may say one that my body is leaning towards, is opening up. I feel myself opening and moving towards it and welcoming that decision. When my body is opening and I feel myself, my breathing not resisting, I know that's something I can incorporate. So it can really inform us even about making hachlata. When I say to my friend, we're gonna go walking every day, I'm like, yeah, right. Already your body is telling you, no, that's never going to happen. So take that in half until it's like, let's go walking once a week for 10 minutes. do that until that is comfortable for you. And then you say, you know what? I think I could do now twice a week for 10 minutes and keep adding in a way. And that's really the science to like growing your comfort zone. We want to stretch your comfort zone in a way that is stretching it a little bit, but not too much. That you won't do it, that it won't be able to. And it's to keep stretching it until that becomes your new comfort. Then when that becomes comfortable, you stretch more. And that's what it means to be a mahalech, a person who's growing, a mahalech, a human who's constantly growing and expanding tiny bits at a time, taking those tiny bite-sized steps. Even on I always say on my to-do list, when there's something I'm not doing, it's too big. What I do is like bite it, making it into the smallest action item. It's like research this thing, or call someone to ask about this thing, because if the task is too big, sometimes we need to make that task into something that's actually doable and bite-sized that I actually will do. So if we find you're not doing something, the solution is not to keep feeling bad that you're not doing it, it's to cut it into a bite-sized piece that you could swallow. Anyways, that was a really big tangent, but that was the wisdom of if we can live with Mashiach, if even now in our lifetime we already pay attention and realize that our body comes from a higher place than our neshama, and that our neshama actually gets elevated through being in our body. And that's the idea of Sarah being, and taking this back to the Sarah in her lifetime, because Sarah's whole mission was to manifest in a physical way that the things that for Avram were we see that for Avram were potential. We see that even in the acquiring of the land. Hashem told Avraham, walk across the land and it's as if you acquired it. I promise you the land in potential, but through Sarah's passing, it became physical, concrete. Actually, Avram acquired on paper a piece of Eretz Yisrael. Also through perpetuating the Jewish nation. To Hashem, he promised it to Avram, look at the stars in the sky, he took them above, but through Sarah actually birthing physically Yishmael, and then through her passing, through Yishmael bringing a wife who embodied Sarah Imenu, through the woman, she actually makes that possible and brings it in a physical way. And in general, in conception, of conceiving a child, we always think the husband or the male gives the potential, while the woman makes that into an actual, develops that into a physical child that is actually coming down and out of the body into the world. So we have this whole connection between the masculine and the feminine, and we learn in general that the avos gave us our spiritual the general parts of us spiritually, and the imahos gave us the details and the physical details of our genetic, of our makeup. Okay, so that is. I'm going to bring that into one more idea and this week's parsha, there's another question. If we go back to I didn't even open the sources yet, but if we go back to the first pasuk, Vayu Chayei Sarah, Mea Shana ve'esrim Shana ve'sheva Shanim Shnei Chayei Sarah. Sarah's lifetime, and it's a very unusual pasuk because it says 100 years, 20 years, 7 years. It could have just said 127 years once. The repetition of Shana after 100, and then Shana again, years after 7, and then years after 20, and years after 7. Rashi, obviously, and all the Maharshim say, why the repetition of Shana each time? Rashi says the fact that it says 4 times. It says Shnei Chayei Sarah, the years of Sarah's life, and then each time separately to tell us that all of Sarah's life years were equal. It actually says that all of her years were innocent and childlike and open to Hashem and tefillah, like she was 7, like a child. And all of her years were with the teenage determination of a 20-year-old who was bold and brave and courageous and ready to face the world. And all of her years were in perfect sitkaniut and tmimus and wisdom, wise like a 100-year-old. Even when she was young, she was as wise as a 100-year-old. And so it made me think of Brina, like being like full of spunk, even when she was old, but also being full of so much wisdom and like beauty and innocence and tmimus and connection, talking to Hashem. So that really, like when I read this, I'm like, wow, that was Brina. So Rashi says, Kulan Shavim Latova. He says the Shana, repetition of Shana, is to tell us that all her life was equal and good. The commentaries all ask the question, what do you mean all her life was? She was childless for 90 years. She suffered. Avraham married her maidservant who taunted her and tormented her. She was abducted twice and taken into a horrible harem of a king. What do you mean her life? She had to leave everything behind. You can't say that her 90 childless years were as good as her 37 years of bearing her beloved child. And this question is asked, and I think the answer comes from what we said earlier about what true emes life is. If the neshama recognize what is eternal, what is emes, what is nitzchi, is the neshama's choices, the neshama chooses in any situation that recognize that life and happiness is not the circumstances given to us. Because a person can have the most fortunate, privileged life and be miserable and be lacking joy and be the most unhappy person in the world. And a person could be in the worst, have the worst upbringing and the worst life and given the most terrible life, but be the most joyful person. And we see this story so many times in history, and even people we know now. There's people who are privileged, who are miserable, and there's people who have such a hard life who are so full of joy. And so we recognize that true joy is from emes, is from things that are eternal, things that they can't take away from us. And this obviously, this brings me to quote Edith Edgar, who when she was 90 years old, which is really crazy because Sarah gave a child at 19. Edith Edgar, her best-selling book came when she was 90 years old in 2016. She was a Holocaust survivor of Auschwitz, and I brought you this a quote on the top. She said a few things I'll share with you. Her book is called The Choice. She speaks about how she recognized that even in the Holocaust, she was able to hang on to and survive by having purpose and meaning in the Holocaust, in the most deplorable place in the world, in the atrocities of the Holocaust. And then after, when she was liberated, when she was living a good life in Texas, she found herself miserable and unhappy. And she suddenly recognized that the happiness is a choice from the inside, and it's based on it's on focusing on what we have that's much deeper than the external situation that we live in. And that's what Chayei Sara is. That was the whole idea of living an eternal life, is that it's not about the externals, it's about what's a life of emes. And so she says, and I quote the first one, "Our painful experiences aren't a liability, they're a gift. They give us perspective and meaning, an opportunity to find our unique purpose and our strength." So Sarah recognized this at 127 years old, that her life wasn't more joyful when the circumstances were more joyful, that at every moment of her life, she can connect to her neshama and find true purpose and meaning in every moment of her life, the highs and the lows, whether the external situation was difficult or not. She also says that as they were taken to the camps, and she was walking to the, quote you, on their way to Auschwitz, Edith's mother said to her, "We don't know where we are going. We don't know what is going to happen, but nobody can take away from you what you put in your own mind." That's the eternality. It doesn't matter what happens, what is inside, what is in your heart, what is in your neshama, doesn't end. That's eternal. No one could touch that. No one can take that away. There's many stories about that, about the people, I forget which Rebbe was on his way to the Holocaust. He said that they can hurt your body, but they can't touch what's on the inside. They can't touch your neshama. That's eternal. And that is why, in the face even of a Holocaust or indescribable situations, the person can have exactly pure joy and look and have equal purpose and meaning in those parts of their life as in the good parts of life, when they recognize that all we are in charge of is our choice. And that's Edith Edgar based her book on Viktor Frankl, who said this even earlier, about how all we have is all we can really choose is not the circumstances of what happened to us, but our choice is how if we are victims, we can choose if we're a victim of it, or we are going to live and thrive from the situations. Viktor Frankl, I brought you this in the source. "The one thing you can't take away from me is the way I choose to respond to what you do to me. The last of one's freedoms is to choose one's attitude in any given circumstance. Happiness cannot be pursued, it must ensue. Life is never made unbearable by circumstances, but only by lack of meaning and purpose." And again, Chayei Sara teaches us to create a life of meaning and purpose that perpetuates much after 127 years old. I think should I end this class here? I have another class on true love, but I'll end this one and I'll start, because it's getting cold, maybe we'll move inside. And I'll do the other class on the 3 different types of marriages of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and finding true love, which also reminded me so much of Brina. It is like the beautiful rom-com. It reminds me of like just Brina's life and her true love. So L'chaim, thank you so much for joining. And may we all merit to have a true life full of meaning and purpose, and to have happiness, true happiness from inside and from outside in every situation, and to be rejoined by all of our loved ones very, very, very soon. We love you, Brina, and miss you, and we know that you're going to bring Mashiach.